Absolutely. But first, let's start with Plaid Cymru and talk about the comments from their new leader, Srin ap Iorwerth. With us is their MP for Ceredigion, Ben Lake. Ben, welcome back to Wales Cast on TV this time.
Thank you very much, diolch.
So Plaid has had a difficult year. We don't want to re-litigate all of that, but that's what precipitated the change in leadership. Is Srin ap Iorwerth the right guy to see the party out of all of that?
I think he is, yes, without a doubt. He has, I think, had a very good start to what is a very difficult situation. I think it's important to pay homage as well to Llŷr Griffith for the interim leadership because, you know, the findings of the Neras Evans report were sobering, quite staggering at times as well.
And just to remind everyone, this was looking into allegations of a toxic culture within the party.
Exactly, yeah, and identified a series of failings that the party really needs to address. And Llŷr started the work of putting the work schedules in place to implement some changes, new policies and HR structures, which are incredibly important. But if you don't have them, these serious problems can arise. So Llŷr started a lot of that good work, and Srin has made it very clear that a priority of his is to make sure that that work stream continues and that of the recommendations, we try to implement them as quickly as possible. I think he's right to prioritise that and to put a focus on it because unless we can have those structures in place, people, staff, members, supporters of the party can't have that confidence that it is a safe, welcoming, inclusive environment to be a part of. And without those members, staff, supporters, we can't hope to deliver on any of our political objectives. So I think he's right to do that. And for that reason, I think he's the right leader for us.
So that's obviously the priority, but you do have a big electoral challenge ahead of you, an election in the next, 12, 18 months or so. And let's be honest, electorally speaking, the party's stagnated at many levels for a long time. What does success look like for Plaid Cymru under Srin ap Iorwerth whenever that election comes?
This is going to be a long process, and I think we should be looking more at 5-10 year periods rather than just the next election. So for the next election, you know, I think it would be a very good night indeed if we were able to hold 4 of the 32 seats. I think.
Are you worried you're going to get squeezed in what is often at a general election level a two-party race between the Conservatives and Labour?
I think that's always been the case, especially for the Westminster election. The UK narrative is very, very strong in a Westminster election, understandably so. And in that context, you know, Plaid Cymru, as other sort of third parties will find it as well, very difficult to get the message across. That's our challenge. You know, there's no point complaining. It's up to us to try and overcome those challenges. But I think it'll be a big challenge. And of course, you know, Labour is in the ascendancy on the UK level. You could argue that they've been ascendant in Wales for quite some time. So it'll be interesting to see whether that, you know...
On that, though, I mean, there are those minority voices, admittedly, who are suggesting that perhaps we could be in hung parliament territory next time around. And I guess that begs a question, if that's the case, of Plaid Cymru's role and to what extent the Westminster flank would be willing to do a deal with a potential Labour government or some sort of Labour-led coalition. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think firstly, those sort of minority voices, I believe, have a very good point because, and perhaps you don't want to go into the details of it, but structurally speaking, it is going to be a challenge for Keir Starmer to actually replicate sort of the 97 style swings across the country and of course regain a foothold in Scotland. You know, they're not going to be able to gain that many more seats in Wales really, partly because they already have a lot of the seats and also of course the total number will be reduced to the next election. But in hung parliament sort of territory, let's put it that way, it all depends on how many seats we can, Plaid Cymru, we can actually win. You know, if we are talking about 2 seats, then I don't think that we'll have much hope of gaining any meaningful leverage over, a minority Labour government. And so I think that a deal is not worth having because we won't be able to get anything worthwhile.
If it comes to it, small parties have outsized influence in situations like that, don't they? And I just wonder are there conversations going on about the hypotheticals if that situation were to emerge? And what do you think should be some of Plaid's red lines if those sorts of negotiations do end up taking place?
I think I'm not aware of any conversations that are ongoing, but that's not to say that there aren't any. I'm just not senior enough in the party to know of them. I think though if in that context, I would be pushing the party to drive a very hard bargain because it's unlikely in the hung parliament territory that any sort of minority administration will be able to hold it for the 5 years, in which case you'd want initially something that can be delivered quite quickly, something that you can hold them to account almost immediately, something that can be delivered in a year, 18 months. And then also, given the political price that we'll have to pay, it needs to be significant. And I would be looking at devolution of justice and policing, for example. We'd be looking as well, I think, at banning consequentials for HS2, something that the Welsh Labour Party are very in favour of. UK Labour Party, not quite as keen on.
More broadly than the election, how would you sort of characterise Plaid Cymru's sort of relationship with Labour now, given the cooperation deal in the Senedd? Not everyone in Plaid's happy with that relationship, but, it's going forth. Pryn ap Iorwerth, the new leader, says he'll back it until the end and then there'll be a new relationship. How would you sort of characterise Plaid's relationship with Labour at the moment?
I think it's realistic and pragmatic. Certainly,
so you back the co-op deal and you think it's the right thing to do?
I think that in the circumstances in which it was agreed, I understand why we wanted to pursue the agreement, and if we are able to realise a lot of the priorities listed in the cooperation agreement, I would I'd be happy to accept that it is a success. In terms of the longer term, I think that it is not controversial to suggest that in any democracy you need a change in government. And I believe, it's one of the reasons why I joined Plaid Cymru, that Plaid Cymru should be leading the Welsh Government. And in order to do that, it's my personal opinion, that you need to supplant Labour and defeat Labour in Wales. And in order to do that, you need to challenge them. And I think that whilst there are very important sort of priorities and policy objectives that have been realised through cooperation, I think it is also the case that for the future of Wales, it's important that we have healthy sort of opposition and challenge. And that's to the benefit of the Labour Party as well as democracy in Wales in general.
So it might be a different attitude come the next Senedd election, depending how the numbers shape up. Pryn ap Iorwerth also had some interesting stuff to say about independence.
That's right, because his predecessor, Adam Price, of course, had promised an independence referendum according to a timetable. Pryn ap Iorwerth saying, I'm not doing it according to a timetable. There are a lot of people that need convincing about this, and he wouldn't tie himself to a date. Are you supportive of that, or are you disappointed to see that sort of concrete marker slip a little bit?
We need to realise that if we are ever to have an independence referendum, we need to win it. And that's what I'm all about. I'm about winning independence, not having a referendum and then losing. And I think Pryn is right to point out that we have a lot of work to convince people of Wales that independence is a good thing for them, for their families, for their communities. And I know there will be some who are frustrated given the failures and the deficiencies of the current constitutional makeup, that we're not making swifter pace. What I would tell to those people is we are making progress. People are starting to warm to the idea of independence, but it's not solid. It's and certainly not a majority of the population of Wales. And I think we'd be foolish to pursue something that tie ourselves to an arbitrary date in the calendar, ignorant completely of the facts on the ground. Because if we were to get a referendum, and that'll be a challenge in itself, we cannot afford to lose it.
Do you think it takes a backward step if Labour's in power?
I think that
because so much of the sport has been tied up with, let's be honest, anti-conservative feeling amongst Welsh Labour, Plaid Cymru voters in Wales.
Well, I think it's certainly the case that the Conservative Party and a Conservative government has helped the case for independence. But I'm not too sure that a Labour Party in Westminster necessarily will deflate sort of the campaign. In fact, I think it might propel it even further, because you will then see that it is a structural issue with the constitution of the UK, rather than the colour of the political party governing in London. That is the problem. And in those circumstances, I think you could see the campaign for Welsh independence actually gather momentum.
So many ifs.
So many more questions, but we will leave it there, Ben Lake. It's been great to have you on. Thanks very much indeed.